Dragon Quest was first released in 1986 and was originally called Dragon Warrior in the West, but that's a whole thing I won't get into here. It's called Dragon Quest now, and we'll leave it at that. More importantly, it's the very first JRPG. Alright, no, it's not the first role-playing video game ever made in Japan, but it is the first example of the genre we know as JRPG today. For sure, it's the game that codified the tropes and basic formula used in almost every JRPG since. It's a classic in every sense of the word, the granddaddy, and is Japan's original take on the Dungeons and Dragons inspired Western RPGs released during the 80s like Ultima and Wizardry. And to think, I considered skipping this one when I first got interested in the series. I do not recommend doing that, since the modern remake, which I'll be focusing on in this video, is super accessible on consoles like the PS4, Switch, or even mobile. It's also fairly short, under 10 hours, which is nice if you're used to massive JRPGs. Anyway, Dragon Quest is widely considered the first JRPG because it introduced common features of the genre, including the simple menu system, at least in comparison to Western RPGs in the mid-80s, classic combat options familiar to anyone who's played a JRPG, attack, spell, items, and flee, random encounters, an overworld map to explore, towns with navigation puzzles to solve, basic equipment, and crazy monster designs. Going into this game, I knew nothing about Dragon Quest except that slimes are a thing, and that the series is known for its monster designs. Well, I'm not surprised, because even from this first game, I can see why many of these monsters became classics. The remake features new hand-drawn art for each creature, which looks great, but I also watched runs of the NES version to get the classic experience. I would have liked the option to play with the original sprites in the remake, but it wasn't a deal breaker for me. This brings me to a sticking point I have when trying to play the classics. On the one hand, I want to play the original version of any game when possible because I want the same experience a regular old fan at the time of release would have had. On the other, I don't own a NES or SNES, so I'm often forced to play remakes or enhanced versions of games. While not ideal for me, these usually have a speed-up feature or other quality-of-life improvements that tend to outweigh my desire for the true OG experience. In the case of Dragon Quest, I don't mind. I'm happy to watch a speedrun of the NES version to get a feel for what it was like, then appreciate all the improvements in the remake. After all, I'm old enough to remember playing NES games when they were new. I just wasn't into RPGs at the time. It's easy to get back into the mindset of my young, early 90s self and appreciate classics like this. But now that I'm older, I'm also happy to be able to save at any time, for example, and not waste hours of my life. With all the modern enhancements, Dragon Quest is an easy game, though it requires a legendary amount of grinding, even in the remake, and especially for the final boss. I don't personally mind this, as I like to turn on a podcast and zone out a bit while I grind, making it go by super fast, but this is an obvious spot for the sequels to potentially improve on. At any rate, when I say this version is easy, I'm only referring to the combat, because the obtuseness of the main plot is here in full force. While there aren't many NPCs compared to what you might find in modern JRPGs, I'm thankful I took copious notes of what each person said, as nearly every bit of information turned out to be crucial in understanding the world, and more importantly, where to go next. With that said, it's manageable and I never needed to reference a guide, but I also have a lot of patience and enjoy slowly working out clues and retracing my footsteps, so your mileage may vary on that. If you do enjoy that old school adventure game style of figuring out clues using somewhat out-of-the-box thinking, there's a lot to love here. One of my favorite things about the game is how simple it is conceptually, or maybe humble is the more appropriate word. Stats for characters, weapons, and everything else start in the single digits and stay there for much longer than you'd find in a game like, say, Final Fantasy, or even later Dragon Quest games. Your max HP doesn't reach 100 until the game is nearly over, for crying out loud. Each fight consists of your hero against a single enemy. That's practically unheard of today, so it was kinda refreshing. You either attack, use a spell, use an item, or flee. Even though it doesn't matter in the overall scheme of things, this contrast to other well-known JRPG series, in addition to all the memorable enemy designs, sets Dragon Quest apart. I can see why it hooked players on release and why the series continues to enthrall to this day. The music is brilliant. I didn't know I was familiar with the Dragon Quest theme until I instantly recognized it when starting the game for the first time. The story is rather bland, but feels appropriately epic. You play the descendant of the legendary hero Erdrick, or Loto apparently, in the original NES release. I'm glad they changed that one. At least Erdrick sounds like a somewhat realistic name for a medieval-esque knight. Anyway, as the descendant of Erdrick, you're chosen by the king to rescue the princess and defeat a great evil. That's all there is to the story, but it works well, given the small scale of the world and game overall. Again, it took me less than 10 hours to beat, and I did plenty of plodding along and reloading saves. All of this is a good thing, it fits the design of the game well. My only complaint is the difficulty of the final boss, since the only purpose of his insane amount of HP is to force grinding at the very end. You do get quite the sense of satisfaction when you finally take him down though, which I think contributed to this game's initial success. You're the hero, but you have to earn it. Speaking of which, the protagonist is the only character who gets any kind of development here, but the unique angle, for 1986 anyway, is that there is no canon name for the hero. He's your hero, whoever you want him to be, and in this respect, I grew more attached to Rob, my hero, than I might normally in a JRPG. You might not get to make choices that affect the world, but you do get to role play as a hero, which I think is the core of what makes a JRPG. It helps that the world is brilliantly designed, full of color, and small enough for every location to be memorable. I can picture the entire map in my head and remember the locations and names of all the major towns, which is more than I can say for most games of the genre. It's a world that makes me want to come back just to run around, fight monsters, and listen to the music. Dragon Quest lives up to its legacy by truly feeling like the origin of a genre. And I encourage any fan of any kind of JRPG to give this one a try. What a gem! It's no wonder Japan loves this series so much, and I can tell that from just the first game. That's all for this JRPG Quickie. Please subscribe for more videos on Dragon Quest and other JRPGs. Thanks for watching.